Hey, Progressive National Baptist Convention, guess what? We are celebrating 60 years. 60 years, can you believe it? So join us August the 3rd through the 5th, 2021. We will be celebrating our 60th year anniversary. The Progressive National Baptist Convention started as a movement reflecting the political, religious, and social climate of its time. And guess what? We are still in the fight for justice. We are our ancestors' dreams, and we stand on the shoulders of Reverend T.M. Chambers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Prathia Hall, Dr. Gardner C. Taylor, Dr. Timothy Stewart. And guess what? We are needed now more than ever. So join us August the 3rd through the 5th, 2021 for the 60th anniversary of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hi, I'm Gandhi Pinder, Director of Communications for the Progressive National Baptist Convention, Incorporated. Thank you so very much for joining us. I would love to invite you to stay connected with us via social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at PNBC Inc. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel at PNBC Inc. for regular updates and amazing content. And now, we welcome you to this special edition of the Progressive Hour, a production and presentation of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, Incorporated.
Let me express my appreciation to our esteemed president, Dr. Stewart, for granting the Social Justice Commission this opportunity to share with you some of the things that we are talking about that we believe will make for a prophetic policy agenda for such a time as this. President Stewart, for your prophetic witness, your creative and visionary leadership, we are indebted. And we especially on this evening where we commemorate the life and liberating love and legacy of the drum major for justice, Martin Luther King Jr., we are excited and find it both prophetic and poetic that this night where we commemorate his legacy is sandwiched between the infamy of January 6th, where we witnessed in the United States what prophetic witnesses had been saying would happen for quite some time. The evangelicals have been sinfully silent, and we're living in the aftermath of that. And then in a few days, of course, I believe on Wednesday, we'll have the inauguration, the historic inauguration of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, the first African-American to serve as vice president of this United States. But sandwiched between the aftermath of January 6th and the new era of a Biden-Harris administration is the commemoration of the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I think it's prophetic in that it offers us an opportunity to hold accountable what President-elect Biden said that he would do. He made the audacious statement, Dr. Willie Francois, that, and no other president has ever made this statement. No other president has ever said in his acceptance speech that the African-American community has had my back. And you know we've had the back of many African-American, of many presidents, I'm sorry. He said, the African-American community has had my back, and I promise to have your back. I maintain that we have an obligation to define what it means for him to have our back. And I believe prophetically that given the sandwiching of January 6th and January 20th with January the 18th, the meat of the sandwich, we have a prophetic responsibility to define what it will look like for this administration to have our back. And so Willie Francois, Dr. Willie Francois, you are a professor, you are a pastor, you are a prophet par excellence, one of the most gifted gospel preachers walking the planet today, a Morehouse man, who has walked where Dr. King walked. Given this prophetic moment that we are in, and as we discuss the Social Justice Commission that we have been charged to serve, what would you say should form a prophetic policy agenda that progressive National Baptist can get behind in the tradition of Dr. King, so we can ensure that we define what this administration having our back looks like, and we can continue to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice?
Dr. Haynes, it's a gift to serve with you on this particular arm of our convention. And again, I echo the sentiments of Dr. Haynes in celebrating Dr. Stewart for his wisdom in developing this intergenerational team to do justice, which is what is at the heart of the history of our convention. And I believe that we have an obligation to practice the politics of accountability, as now Democrats are in at least two branches of our government, both houses, both chambers of Congress, and now the White House, in this monumental moment that we have an obligation to accelerate our pressure, to accelerate our campaigns for justice and human rights and equity. And now that we believe that we have allies in the White House and allies controlling both chambers of Congress, this is our moment to achieve exactly what we need to make sure that Black people have power and that Black people are able to live lives of sustainability. And I think it is prophetic that on this night, on the night of King Day, as we are sandwiched between these two pivotal moments that you have mentioned, to remind ourselves that this convention, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which was founded in the middle of revolution, founded to be revolutionary, the denominational home of America's prophet, that it is important for us to name clearly that there is no other denominational body in this country that can claim the kind of legacy of effective social justice engagement, because it was this convention and pastors allied with Dr. King that advanced things like the Voting Rights Act, advanced things like the Civil Rights Act, advanced things like the Voting Rights Act. And we can say, in that tradition of being Democratic first responders in the 60s, which this convention was, making our democracy be what it says it is on paper, now we can even say that this convention has helped to form and produce the first Black U.S. Senator from Georgia. That is the legacy that we have as a convention, which gives us all the more reason, all the more gravitas to walk into our role as gadflies in this country, as we are agitating in service and in commitment to liberation and in commitment to justice. And there's some things that we know that this convention will be committed to under this administration, under the administration of President Stewart. We have outlined that we are organizing churches, organizing clergy, creating learning opportunities, and creating justice opportunities around criminal justice reform, environmental racism, economic justice, and public education. These are broad areas that we will focus in over these next years that we have as a convention, to make sure that we don't miss this moment, to not embrace the symbolism of having our allies in office, but making sure that we actually build power while we have our allies in office. And we can all talk about what we did not do. Hopefully we can be honest about what we did not do to put pressure on the last Democratic president that we had. And we cannot afford to make that kind of misstep as a convention. We cannot afford to make that kind of misstep as people, that now that we have allies in office.
And I think that's very important, that we understand our prophetic witness is not diminished simply because we have allies. We know how to be Moses to Pharaoh, but we also have to be Nathan to David. And so this is no time for us to slack off. I think that what you just said, we can't reinforce enough, because we did make the mistake of putting ourselves in the position of a supporting cast of the last Democratic administration, as opposed to, again, bearing prophetic witness and whatever else our drum major for justice taught us. That is, we have no permanent friends, we have permanent issues, permanent prophetic principles that what fuel our faith and our interaction with the powers that be. In terms of public policy, Dr. Francois, I don't know if we have had more of a friend in the White House than Lyndon Baines Johnson. Under LBJ, we got the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Bill, and eventually the Fair Housing Bill. I mean, 3 bills that targeted in a specific fashion the needs of our community. And I think we got to park there parenthetically and boldly say it is okay for us to make an ask. No, for us to make a demand, to use the language of Frederick Douglass, a demand of public policies that are not race neutral, that, we hope we get the spillover from. We deserve public policies that are race specific. Why? Because it was race specific policies that have placed us in our position of second class citizenship. It's race specific policies that have advantaged whites and disadvantaged Black people. It's race specific policies that have set us back while setting others up at our expense. And so I don't want us to run by that powerful point that you just made, because when we get ready to unpack our policy agenda, please understand we are going to be unapologetically Black as we do this, to quote Jeremiah Wright Jr. in Trinity United Church of Christ there in Chicago, because we understand that Martin Luther King Jr. made a difference. He's the drum major for justice, not because he had a dream, but he is that because he changed the system. He changed the structures. Why? Because he advanced public policy, and the public policies he advanced radically altered the system, so that Bishop William Barber is right when he says the civil rights movement was our second Reconstruction. And I am convinced, Progressive National Baptist, that God has placed us in for such a time as this, where we can be a part of the third Reconstruction. And again, I think it's really great. Progressive National Baptist Convention, the denominational home of the drum major for justice. Progressive National Baptist Convention, the denominational home of the first United States Senator of African descent from the state of Georgia. The denominational home of PNBC produced both of these gospel giants and prophetic witnesses. And so, given that in this hour, where we have the opportunity to create a third Reconstruction, and Reconstruction, again, is not something that is just a I feel good, I have a dream moment. Reconstruction does just that. It restructures, it reconstructs what has been, to conform to a prophetic vision of what ought to be. So, Doc, I mean, let's discuss what those policies look like, that prophetic policy agenda look like. How do you want to begin that conversation?
Doc, there is you just mentioned your namesake Frederick Douglass, who says power concedes nothing except by demand, never has, never will. we should never forget that he says that in the context where he has an ally in the White House.
Come on now.
He says that in the context where he knows he has to put pressure on Lincoln in order to get exactly what his people deserve and exactly what this country needed. So you make a strong point there. But as we think about those four areas that we just named, criminal justice reform, environmental racism, economic justice, education, we can be clear that America still leads the world in incarceration, right? America is still the home of incarceration, and therefore that calls us. It is the crisis of incarceration that calls us to task right now. That we know that it has been named that 2 million children are unaccounted for in the public education system right now in this moment. 2 million children have not re-entered the educational process this year. And that is calling us to task at this moment. That we are living in a time where this administration is going to inherit a worse economy than the one Biden and Obama inherited in 2008. And we know that Black people are significantly more greatly impaired by the economic dynamics and the economic arrangement of our nation. So if anything needs to be race specific, we need some race specific economic policies, because the economic policy of slavery was race specific. And so the economic policy of reparations needs to be race specific.
Boom, boom. And so let's go there, because I was feeling it. And of course, you as the prophetic powerhouse that you are have opened up the door to that conversation that, again, we as Black people cannot be ashamed or apologize for. And that is, we have to boldly say, we built this country. As Angela Rice said, we built this joint for free. So we built the joint for free. We never received our 40 acres and a mule. But even as Ta-Nehisi Coates has pointed out so brilliantly, you don't even got to go back to slavery. You can look at the Homestead Act. You can look at what was done by way of Social Security, excluding us for so long. You can look at what housing did for so long in terms of segregated housing and how public policy, and by way of a wonderful read, please check out the book, The Color of Law by Rothstein, because Rothstein is on it when he talks about how public policy designed our neighborhoods. And so the neighborhoods we are in, it's not accidental. You did not choose to live there. You had options that limited your choices. And when the options limited your choices, ironically, those options found your neighborhood, my neighborhood, infected with landfills and leaded water. So again, that's why we bring up environmental racism and environmental justice, because again, when it comes to repairing what this country has broken and giving us our reparations. And that's why I want to maintain, Dr. Francois, that the reparations must be married to reconstruction, because you can repair us with resources that we long deserve. But if the structure remains the same, the sad reality is our repairing with resources will eventually run into a structure that is already diabolically designed to keep us and set us back. And so I think it's very important that we specifically, getting back to the issue of reparations, that we stand with those who are calling for reparations. We stand with Sheila Jackson Lee. We stand with ADOS. Yes, I'm going there. We stand with Kevin Cosby. We stand with those who are saying that Black people deserve reparations. We cannot be ashamed of it. We don't have to apologize for it. We built this joint for free. It continued in the aftermath of enslavement to show up in policies that continue to both exploit us while enriching others. And so if you are going to be serious about, again, bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice, if you're serious about having our back, you got to be serious about reparations. Pastor, The other thing I think we can't ignore during this time, and that is what COVID-19 has exposed as it relates to the fact that there are pre-existing social, medical, economic conditions that have made our community more susceptible to COVID-19. I think one writer put it like this. He said, COVID-19 didn't break America. It showed where America is broken. And because we are broken, we've got to deal with the facts of medical apartheid. We got to deal with the facts of medical deserts. We have to deal with food apartheid. And really, I need to take desert out of the out of the syntax. Why? Because a desert is a natural phenomenon. Apartheid, that is humanly created as a weapon of oppression. And so medical apartheid, food apartheid, hospital apartheid, all of those particular pieces that conspire to ensure the ill health of Black people must be specifically addressed. I don't know if you saw this. Matter of fact, I'm sure you did. But just a few days ago, I saw this piece that talked about how the health of Black patients fares better under Black doctors. And we already knew this, but they did a study, and the study just borne out what we already knew, that our health opportunities, our health outcomes are better when we are in, being serviced by a Black doctor as opposed to a white doctor. And so these are the kinds of things that, by way of a policy agenda, we've got to deal with the fact that, you want us to take the vaccine. There are some vaccines that, cannot be taken to deal with some of our health issues, because those health issues have to do with zip code as opposed to genetic code.
Yes, sir. The reality of zip code injustice, as I've heard you say before, is alive in our schools. It's alive in the job markets. It is the job apartheid and the education apartheid that exists in our communities are by design. And COVID-19 has exposed what we have been enduring for years. That we know that many in the Black community are dying because of the comorbidities, those underlying pre-existing health issues. But to your point, that there were pre-existing conditions in the economic body of Black America because of the intentional starving, the intentional economic damning that has happened in our communities, that the money is concentrated just across town, and we are living with these equity dams, right? And so what this convention will do with this justice agenda is to tear down the walls of education, medical, job, food apartheid, to tear down the walls of these equity dams that are locking up the wealth in certain parts of town and starving the rest of our towns. And this is the legacy of the convention. This is the legacy of Black churches. We are always clear that we are not descendants of plantation religion. We are the descendants of Brush Harbor spirituality. We are the descendants of the folk that went into the clearing, went into the woods, and through ring shouts were able to preach a word about a God that liberates, and a God that intervenes, and a God that keeps. And so we are the descendants not of those who worship in white gaze. We are the ones who inconvenienced ourselves to worship in the cover of night outside of the gaze of whiteness, believing that God affirmed our personhood. That is who we are as Black people of faith, and that is what's at the heart of this convention. And that's what our policy agenda, our policy advocacy will do to make sure that Black folk have power, that Black folk experience repair, and that America knows that it is on notice, on moral notice, that there is a denominational powerhouse committed to justice in Progressive National Baptist Convention.
Man, you better say that. You better say that. And that's why, and I think I don't think we should close without at least reminding ourselves that we have a president in Dr. Stewart who gives us an opportunity through his witness and his world consciousness to fulfill not only what Dr. Charles G. Adams in his administration was pushing this convention to do, and that is to be global in our witness, but to remember that the drum major for justice, and where do we go from here, chaos or community? And parenthetically, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said that the future of America depends on how she responds to Martin Luther King Jr. January 6th says America chose to respond to Dr. King by choosing chaos.
Yeah.
In order to get to community, I think we got to take Dr. King seriously. And Dr. King in that book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos Our Community, he again talked about dealing with racism as an inherent and entrenched in the structure of America. We've got to boldly deal with that. He talked about dealing with poverty. We cannot ignore the fact that he died fighting for those who are impoverished and could not get a living wage. We must stand with Bishop Barber and those who are pushing for a living wage, a full employment policy. We need that if we're going to be true to Dr. King and push for community and not for chaos. But then the final thing Dr. King was talking about, if I recall it correctly, was having a global consciousness, a world view. And we as Black people in this country must do that and recognize any time that policy is affecting the motherland, affecting our sisters and brothers in South America, in Central America, all throughout the diaspora, just as our Jewish brothers and sisters refuse to allow any policy to exploit Israel and not stand to benefit Israel. We've got to have that same kind of global consciousness when it comes to South Africa, the Congo, which has the second largest rainforest in the world. We have to have the kind of global consciousness that says we are going to push for policies that benefit everyone in the diaspora, because we have a Pan-African prophetic witness, because Dr. King told us that we've got to be global in our thinking. The world is getting smaller and smaller. That's what COVID taught us. Yeah. A disease anywhere is a threat to good health everywhere. So we've got to have that kind of global consciousness. And so, Dr. Stewart, we pledge to have a policy agenda that is not confined to the shores of America, but a policy agenda that is global in its reach. Because as a prophetic witness, we've been called by our Savior to go into all the world.
What a blessing, a unique and a tremendous honor it is to have this distinct privilege to present the Martin Luther King Jr. Award. This year's honoree is unique. In the providence of God, he has been used to inspire hope and to provide inspiration to Progressive Baptists, to our race of people, and to the diaspora throughout the world. We just thank God for the selection of you, how he has prepared you, how you have worked within our convention as our social justice head, and how you have trumpeted throughout Georgia and throughout the world civil rights for the advancement of the people of God. And so we are so delighted that God has called you a prophet, now a plenipotentiary, to carry out his awesome work and his awesome task. And so it is my privilege, on behalf of Progressive Baptists, once again, to present the Martin Luther King Jr. Award to Senator-elect Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. God bless you.
The four most powerful words ever uttered in a democracy are "the people have spoken." When we make sure no one silences our voices or diminishes our vote, we give honor to that great American covenant that we are one people, knit together not by race or ethnicity or national origin or religion, but knit together by an idea, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Only in America is my story even possible. The kid who grew up in public housing gets to be the next United States Senator from the great state of Georgia. That's the American promise. I want to ask you one last time, are you ready? I'm ready to stand up.
Good evening, Progressive Baptist family. Our esteemed president, Dr. Stewart, we salute you. We applaud you for your laudable leadership, your liberating leadership and prophetic witness. And of course, we have to say congratulations. And Lord, I am peacock proud and honeymoon happy to say congratulations to our Reverend Dr. Senator-elect Raphael Warnock, the recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Award. Congratulations to Senator-elect. I just got to keep saying that, Senator-elect Raphael Warnock. By the way, Alpha Man Raphael Warnock. I had to drop that in there. Congratulations, Senator Raphael Warnock. I served under you as you gave leadership to our Social Justice Commission in the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and how appropriate it is that you are receiving the Martin Luther King Jr. Award. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, brothers. It's wonderful to be here with you, and always good to be with the Reverend Dr. Freddie Douglass Haynes. Thank you so much for your leadership and your voice. You are certainly one of God's trombones. It's been wonderful to work with you across the years. To our esteemed President, Dr. Stewart, thank you so much for your leadership over the convention that provided for Dr. King a spiritual home.
Yeah.
We gather today in his memory, and we are inspired by his voice that echoes even from the crypt. I cannot be all that I ought to be until you are all that you ought to be. So all of us share in this honor, this new assignment that I have. I am glad to be the 11th Black United States Senator.
Wow.
I'm also sad that I'm only the 11th Black United States Senator. We've got work to do, and you encourage me and inspire me to do more by honoring me in this way.
Yes, well deserved. The honor is, and I'll just say that we are so proud of you. You made all of our chests stick out during the campaign. You handled yourself in such a phenomenal and prophetic and integritous way when all the attacks came. And one of the things you shared that blessed me in a profound way, and I think that any person of faith who recognizes and follows our Lord and Liberator Jesus the Christ, when you were under attack, when the Black church, when Black liberation theology was assaulted, you clapped back brilliantly. You said, I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. I said, preach, Warnock, do not go there. Don't have me throw my shoe at you during the debate. You said, I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. And I want to ask you as we begin this conversation, as a Matthew 25 Christian, how will that influence your policies as you move into your offices there in Washington, D.C. Because again, Jesus said, I was hungry, thirsty, etc. And he's talking to nations. He's judging nations. So he's talking about public policy. So how will your Matthew 25 theology influence public policy?
Yeah, thank you so much. Look, my faith, as you know, is the foundation for everything that I try to do. And I am there to represent the people of Georgia, all the people of Georgia. But my faith provides the values that guide the work that I do.
Yes,
and so when I say I'm a Matthew 25 Christian, you know that saying of Jesus when he said that in that day they'll stand before me and the Lord will say, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you gave me clothes. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was sick. I was sick. I was in prison and you visited me. And someone said, when, Lord, were you hungry or thirsty? When were you naked? When were you in prison? When were you sick? And he said, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it also unto me. And as you point out, that passage is about the nations. It is the nations that stand before God. And I think that in our American context, we have embraced such an individualistic theology.
Come on, Doc.
So focused on our personal well-being and our personal salvation that we've made of it a completely private matter, so that even when the scripture is clearly talking about systems, clearly talking about public policy, it goes over our heads.
Yeah.
Because we have embraced, in my view, a distorted kind of Christian theology. Jesus is too often a victim, as I've heard you say, of identity theft.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to do in the campaign and what I will endeavor to do as a United States Senator is to represent a countervailing view of Christian faith that challenges the loudest and most well-financed voice of Christian faith in American public life right now, that's focused on one or two narrow issues that seems to think that somehow Jesus is aligned with the richest of the rich. And so for me, love your neighbor as you love yourself means that you don't rob your neighbor of healthcare, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. It means you don't call people essential workers without paying them an essential wage, providing for the essential benefits. And so when I say my faith will inform my work, I certainly don't mean that in any narrow sectarian way. But I mean that it's not so much the doctrine as much as it is the values that emerge from my faith that will inform my work in a diverse democratic republic where people of various faith traditions. I think it's the same values that emerge from all of the great faith traditions. All of the great faith traditions have some variation of love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Brilliant, brilliant. Doc, one of the things that I find poetic is that today we commemorate the legacy and life of Dr. King. And in a few days, 2 days, we will inaugurate President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Alpha Kappa Alpha, and it will be in the aftermath of January 6th, a day that will live in infamy, which ironically was the day after January 5th, a history-making day. But we're living now in the aftermath of January 6th, and so much is coming out about that. And I feel like Dr. King is sandwiched between the 6th of January and the 20th of January. How should, and again, I'm asking you as a great fan of the divided mind of the Black church.
That's right. Should? My book is on Amazon.com, $24.95.
That's right. So I'm asking you, Doc, as an heir to his prophetic legacy, What is Dr. King saying to this country? I think it was Abraham Heschel who said that, you know, the future of America depends on how she responds to Dr. King. His last book, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? January 6th represented chaos. January 5th represented community. And so my question is, what is Dr. King saying as we move toward January 20th by way of an agenda to bring about community out of this chaos?
Yeah, yeah. Somehow there have been forces afoot in our country that have convinced too many of our citizens that their neighbors are the problem. Those other people, whoever those other people are, those brown, those black people, those people who sound different, those people come from a different neighborhood. And we've been wrestling with this for a long time. And if we pin all of this on one man who just for a few more hours, praise the Lord, occupies the Oval Office. If we pin all of it on him, we will miss the opportunity to redeem the soul of America.
Yes, sir.
Because you've got to deal with the sickness that gave birth to him. America is a great nation, but you know, all of us have some kind of pre-existing condition.
Yeah.
And we've been wrestling with this condition in the soul of America for centuries. And, you know, along came this virus over the last year called COVID-19. And it's an interesting moment. It is a tragic virus. Nearly 400,000 Americans are gone. It's a tragic moment, but it's also a teachable moment. It is what I call the parable of a pandemic, because the pandemic has brought into clearer focus certain truths that we should have embraced a long time ago. Suddenly we're dealing with a deadly airborne disease. My neighbor is sick. She coughs. I'm potentially imperiled by my neighbor's cough. That doesn't make my neighbor my enemy. That just means that we're tied, as Dr. King said, in a single garment of destiny.
Yes, sir.
He might be without health insurance. She might be uncovered, but I'm unprotected. And so I want my neighbor to have healthcare coverage because it's the moral thing to do. It's the right perspective, but it is also enlightened self-interest.
Yes.
It is enlightened self-interest. I should want my neighbor to have healthcare coverage. Now that we have a vaccine, I should want to make sure that she has access to that vaccine, regardless of her income or her neighborhood. I should want my neighbor's children to have access to good quality education so that they can become productive citizens who then contribute to my Social Security. I should want them to be able to earn a livable wage and to retire with dignity. A tragic pandemic has reminded us that we are as close together in our humanity as a cough. In spite of all of the superficial differences, phenotypical differences of race and color, we are as close in our humanity as a cough. And I think that what Dr. King and his voice summons us to in this moment is to recommit ourselves to building what he called the beloved community. We are at war.
Yes.
Two viruses at the same time. We will not succeed in fighting COVID-19 and other viruses similar to that until we stand together. We've got to fight what I call COVID-16-19.
Thank you.
And that is our ongoing struggle against the virus of racism and bigotry as it shows up in this country and has shown up time and time again. First is slavery. We thought that we had beat the virus when we fought a bloody civil war, but the virus mutated and came back with a vengeance.
Yes, sir.
In Jim and Jane Crow segregation. And then during the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, we thought we had finally achieved herd immunity through the powerful moral voice of Martin Luther King Jr. And certainly we achieved much. But then the virus came back through mass incarceration, and now the land of the freest incarceration capital of the world. We warehouse 25% of the world's prisoners. Our children experience all of the forms of discrimination that Dr. King fought against: housing discrimination, voting discrimination, job discrimination, simply through the criminal justice system. Once they label you with felon, all of those forms of injustice, discrimination are reinscribed.
Right.
And work of fighting this virus that is so resilient, has an incredible ability to reinvent itself. That work must be continued on with vigilance, with power. And if we didn't know it before January 6th, we certainly know it now. But here's the thing that worries me. I am worried that we have faced over the last 4 years such an unabashed and unembarrassed kind of bigotry that lowered the bar. And going forward, we have to make sure that the bar for racism, the bar for dealing with injustice, can't simply be, well, they carried a Confederate flag.
Right, right.
Or they're members of the Proud Boys. All of these kinds of obvious expressions of bigotry. If the bar is that low, we're going to have a whole lot of work to do, because the truth is people of color, other marginalized people deal with systemic injustice every day, which is much more subtle, the kind of microaggressions that press against one's humanity. And we have to be vigilant in building a society that embraces the somebodyness of all of God's children.
I love that. I love that. Thou art a prophet. Because again, environmental racism is not a Proud Boy issue. That's not the Proud Boys calling me the N-word. It's literally cutting my life expectancy, 15 years less than others who live in other areas. So yes, so powerful. Doc, you did, no, let me do this right quick, because the theme of the convention, of course, is maximizing our potential. And I am having the privilege right now of interviewing one. My God, that's exactly what you've done. When you look at the humble beginnings, when you look at the fact that in spite of humble beginnings, and maybe because of humble beginnings, here you go to Morehouse College and brilliantly handle your tenure there, Union Theological Seminary, earn a PhD degree. And I will never forget one of the greatest moments for me, and you've had too many more, but to sit in the White House during an Easter prayer breakfast, and the guest preacher was Dr. Raphael Warnock. And Doc, you preached that day about your father's hands, So that message still lives with me. It resonates with me. I've heard you preach at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. I've heard you preach on many large platforms. You delivered the eulogy for the late, great father of Black liberation theology, James Cone. And you've maximized your potential. Here you are, United States Senator, pastoring the church that was the spiritual home of Martin Luther King Jr. For all of us out here who are trying to get it together and maximize our potential, please give us, how'd you do that?
You're embarrassing me, Reverend Dr. Haynes. Your job as a friend is to lower people's expectations. But I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Listen, I have just wanted to be a vessel. Yeah. And I mean, with all my heart, I have just wanted to be an instrument of God's glory. And I want somebody who's looking at me and hearing all of that to know that, if you get out of the way, God might actually manage to do something with you.
Wow.
I think that everything that I have comes from God. And I think that too often, even, especially those of us who have the vocation of speaking on behalf of God every week,
we get it twisted sometimes. And with the accolades and the affirmation, you can lose yourself in all of that. And, you know, Jesus said that if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you would lose your life for my sake,
yes, sir.
And I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that joy and fulfillment comes when you give yourself over to something that's larger than you.
Yes.
You know, we live where everybody's, I gotta find myself. I gotta find myself. Jesus showed us the key that if rather than seek yourself, if you would give yourself over to something larger than you will find yourself in the process. And so what I've tried to do, and it's an ongoing project, we all wrestle with it. I've tried to get out of my own way and say to God, not my will, but thine will be done. I do believe that one's life's project ought to be larger than your lifespan. Find something that's too big for you to finish in your lifetime. And your job is just to do a little part of that work. But then like a relay race, you're going to pass it on to the next generation. You know, everybody celebrates Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but let me just tell you, in just the history of this church where I'm sitting right here, Ebenezer Baptist Church, and there's a collage of our history sitting behind me.
Oh, yeah.
It celebrates Dr. King for good reason. Greatest civil rights leader of the 20th century. But when you think about the Voting Rights Act, everybody knows that the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. What few people know is that Dr. King's father, Daddy King as he was affectionately called, led a voting rights campaign in Atlanta.
Yes, sir.
In 1935.
Come on, Doc.
30 years before the voting rights law was passed, Martin Luther King Sr. was fighting for voting rights here in Atlanta. His son elevated it to the national stage. He was the third pastor of the church, Daddy King. I'm only the fifth since 1886. The second pastor of our church was Dr. King's maternal grandfather,
right,
A.D. Williams. And he fought for the first public school for Black children in Atlanta. Prior to the 1920s, there was no public high school for Black children to attend. Dr. King and his siblings attended a high school that existed only because of the activism and advocacy of his maternal grandfather, the second pastor of the church. I'm saying to you that our life's project ought to be larger than our lifespan. We do the work. We don't see it as something that we own. We pass it on to the next generation. That work has been passed on to me. And what I'm trying to do is just to be a good steward and then pass it on to the next generation.
And that's exactly what you're doing. PNBC, wow. Raphael Warnock. No, let me say it right. Reverend Dr. Senator-elect Raphael Warnock. Yes, you're representing all the people of Georgia, and I love how you emphasize that. Let me tell you something, bruh. You representing PNBC, Freddie Haynes. And when you stand up, I never will forget when Jesse Jackson in '84 made his speech in San Francisco, and he said, when my name goes in the nomination, your name goes in the nomination. Let me tell you something, Doc. When you stand up in that United States Senate, we are standing with you, proud of you, praying for you, and looking forward to what God will continue to accomplish through you as your life's project exceeds your lifespan. Yes, I'll be preaching that real soon. I will call your name one time, but then it is all mine. God bless you. Thank you so much for being the gift that you are.
Thank you. You will preach that as only Freddie Haynes can, my alpha brother. Love you, man.
Love you, bro. Love you.
Hey, Progressive National Baptist Convention, guess what? We are celebrating 60 years. 60 years. Can you believe it? So join us August the 3rd through the 5th, 2021. We will be celebrating our 60th year anniversary. The Progressive National Baptist Convention started as a movement reflecting the political, religious, and social climate of its time. And guess what? We are still in the fight for justice. We are our ancestors' dreams, and we stand on the shoulders of Reverend T.M. Chambers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Prathia Hall, Dr. Gardner C. Taylor, Dr. Timothy Stewart. And guess what? We are needed now more than ever. So join us August the 3rd through the 5th, 2021 for the 60th anniversary of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. We look forward to seeing you there.